So I'm talking about It Chapter 2, which is directed by Andy Muschietti, and also stars Jessica Chastain, James McAvoy, and Bill Hader, amongst many other actors who I'm not too familiar with. But they're all good, so I just thought I'd throw that in there. It Chapter 2 is a follow-up to It Chapter 1, which is a movie that came out in September of 2017. This movie is a follow-up that jumps 27 years ahead into the story, and we get to see the adult versions of the characters we grew to love from the 2017 movie. And this movie, first and foremost, is cast, I would say, perfectly for the adult actors that are playing the kid roles, or the adult versions of the kids from the first movie. I would say that whoever the casting director for this movie is deserves all the praise, because one thing that stood out for this movie is how well that these actors have portrayed the adult versions and the grown-up versions of these kids, who carry the same fears, carry the same weight as the actors did in the first one, but in a way that is more adult, and you can see the years have been not so kind on a lot of them, and there's been something that has been dwelling inside of them that they just can't seem to figure out what it is, because the longer you're away from Derry, the more your memory of Derry and the things that happen and Pennywise's influence begins to fade away. I think first and foremost, one of the best things about this movie was the characters and the way that they got to interact with each other, and the way that they played up these adult versions of these child actors. I think it was pitch perfect. I think whoever the casting director was gets all the praise for this movie, because the casting was the best part of this movie. And I'll kind of get into the horror aspects of it later, but for now I just kind of want to talk about how good this cast is. Now, a lot of the complaints about this movie have addressed how there isn't a lot of character development. There's a lot of time in the movie. 2 hours and 49 minutes is a long time, so you'd expect a lot of development. But when you're trying to spread that amongst 7 characters, it's a little bit hard to do that, because you get bits and pieces here and there, but also these people have to confront their fears individually. In the middle of the movie, I think it's around the second act, they have to confront their fears. They have to find certain items or tokens about them that represent some repressed memory from their childhood. So going back, it's a lot about revisiting old fears. It's about embracing your old memories, about conquering these things that have been such a burden on your life. These little things that when you're a kid and you become an adult, those things don't just disappear. They either stick with you or you conquer them. So this movie's about that, and I really like that message about it. But a lot of the complaints that I've been seeing on the internet is that it's too long. The pacing is so taxing, and I'm just watching it, and I never felt that for a second. I was just so wrapped up in the characters. I wanted to see these characters overcome these things, because yes, these kids in the first movie, they fought a fucking clown in like a sewer. And if you think bringing all those memories back won't do something to your psyche, you're stronger than me, because that shit would tear me apart. And the way that they felt the weight of that call, when Mike calls them all, brings them back to Derry, it felt so real. And it felt like the impact from the first movie was still there with these adult actors. And I really like the way they translated that. But of course, it's hard to give all the characters their shine. And obviously some characters shine more than others. And I think the stars of this movie would definitely be Ben and Richie, played by Bill Hader. And Ben was played by an actor that I'm not familiar with, but I'll put his name down below. But I think they were probably the standouts of this movie for myself. I feel like their characters got the most development, especially Bill Hader's character, which is dude brought me to tears like twice. Oh, how could I forget Eddie? Eddie was also a standout, as well as he was in the first movie. His child counterpart was equally as entertaining, and his adult counterpart was pitch perfect in the way that he portrayed an adult version of this kid. It's just casting all around, magnificent. But yeah, back to the pacing. Obviously there were some issues. Some scenes went on a little bit too long. There was some repetition. Throughout the film where you felt like, okay, this character needs to do this, and then this character is going to be confronted by Pennywise, and then rinse and repeat. And yeah, but the thing is, they set that up before, so you kind of know that's what you're going to expect. It doesn't make it any better, but you kind of have to sit through it. And I liked overall just seeing these characters that I've grown to love overcome these things. And I like seeing that growth, even though some people are saying, well, they had that growth when they were kids. But yeah, they were kids But as an adult, you have different fears that you have to conquer. You have different ways that you have to look at things. You have a different perspective. 27 years is a long time. So these kids are probably like in their 40s, close to their 50s. And so obviously you're going to have a very fresh perspective on fear and what your fears are. And another complaint, I guess this review is just addressing people's complaints on the internet. But another complaint that people had was that, yes, it was confronting their fears, but in the long run, a lot of these characters didn't have any of their fears changed. A lot of them had the same fears. But that's the thing, it's Pennywise died 27 years ago and he came back 27 years later. It's not like in that time Pennywise had his whole life. He was doing taxes, he was doing a day job or anything. He was just hibernating. So he doesn't remember anything else. He only knows the fears from the kids. He remembers that, and he kind of expects that to be the same fear that they hold as adults. And so this is about kind of being an adult, and how would you approach that same fear, and how would you address it now that you've had all this experience from life. So I kind of like that. And maybe a lot of people didn't feel that, but I felt it through the way that this movie was directed, and I felt it through some of the scenes. Obviously, some of the scenes could have been shortened down, but I really didn't have an issue with it. It flew by for me. It felt like 2 hours, which is still a long movie. I think most movies should be like an hour and 30 or an hour and 40 minutes max. But certain movies, I'm fine with it. I have no complaints. So yeah. Moving on. I guess now I'll dabble into the horror elements of this movie. For me, I'm not like a big horror buff or anything like that. I do really like horror movies when they come out, but it's not the first thing I'm gonna go buy a ticket for. I usually have to be kind of coaxed into it. I have to hear some good thing about it. I have to know that some directors attached to it. I have to know some actors attached to it. I have to know if the writers that I really like are attached to it. Like I have to know that certain names are attached to it for me to really get interested in it. Not like most action films or most like indie films or dramas where I'm just like, that looks good, let's go watch it. Like for me, horror is kind of like you gotta pull me by my ear to get me into the theater. But for this movie, since I liked the first movie so much, I thought it was a really fun horror movie. It was like Stand By Me meets It. I just felt like it was a nice coming of age movie, and this movie felt like that but continued. But I felt like a lot of the horror was dulled down a little bit. It felt a little bit muted compared to a lot of the character stuff, which for me, I think the character stuff is what stood out for me, and that's what I really liked about it. I would be fine if this movie wasn't called a horror movie. I would be more fine with it being called like a sci-fi thriller, because it really does feel like that. It really feels like kind of like a alien type of movie where it's just there's something that all these people need to band together and figure out how to defeat. So it didn't really feel too akin to like a Rosemary's Baby or some classic horror movie. It just felt, like a fun romp, and I'm completely fine with that. But if you came in, oh my god, I'm so gassy. If you came in expecting a horror film, then I'll understand your gripes with it. But for me, I really liked the character stuff a lot more. That's the stuff I really cared about in the first movie anyways. The horror stuff, I'm an easily scared person, but let me be honest, like what I find scary is the horror stuff that's happening in the background, is this subtlety, and that's what I find really dreadful and terrifying, like The Witch. It's a great example of just subtle horror where it just kind of seeps into your bones and you just feel so uneasy in your seat and you feel uncomfortable. That's the stuff that like really sticks with me. But It Chapter 2 kind of felt like, jump scares here and there, and I felt like the subtlety was a little bit lost in this movie. There was a little bit more in the first movie, but the second one kind of ditched that, I kind of missed the stuff in the background happening where you kind of have to spot it, and you don't know that something's happening in the back, but when you catch it, you're like, oh my god, I didn't even notice that, and it kind of catches you off guard. A lot less of that in this movie, but keep in mind that this is a different approach. This is a certain director, knowing that, what was popular about the first movie kind of carried over into the second movie, so he was like, oh, people like the characters, well, let's do something more with the characters. People really like Pennywise. They thought he was funny. Well, let's make him let's up the ante with that. And so that doesn't make it a better movie. That doesn't make it a better experience. But I understand from a financial perspective why he'd bump that up a little bit. But yeah, it doesn't make the movie better or worse. But that's just me throwing that in there for you guys. So yeah, overall, like the horror thing not being as scary as you wanted it to be didn't really bug me too much. I enjoyed it, and the character stuff I really liked. I like some of the things that they did with certain characters. I don't want to go into detail because it's kind of a spoiler, but one character in particular gets a really cool arc in the movie, and it's really touching. And one of the characters having something done to them by Pennywise, it just really tugged at my heartstrings, and I really felt it. And yeah, I felt like these people were really friends, and I think that's what I really got out of this movie. It's camaraderie. It's about, for myself, I think coming of age is coming from one stage and transitioning to the next. And whatever that time in your life it may be, it could be from your 40s to your 50s, your 50s to your 60s, but anything like that is just you're being reintroduced to a different version of your life that you weren't ready for. And how do you kind of cope with that? How do you kind of overcome these fears that you had, or this anticipation that you've had for this thing? How are you going to conquer it? And that for me is what's really interesting. And yeah, I wouldn't say that this is one of the scariest horror movies ever, but I got a lot of joy out of it, and I would give this movie a 7.5 out of 10. I had a lot of fun watching this movie, and I hope you guys will too. The 2 hours and 49 minute runtime, or 2 hours and 50 or whatever people are saying, it's not that you can complain about a lot of things, but the runtime, man, like, don't run away from it. If you watch Avengers Endgame, or if you watch Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, then you have the patience to get through this movie. And if you don't enjoy it, then you don't enjoy it. But don't not watch it because you're intimidated by how long it is. Like, come on. It's not that bad. Like, you'll get used to it. Once you get over that second act, like that third act is super quick. But how did you like the movie? Did you watch the movie? If you haven't watched the movie and you watch this review first, you'll probably want to watch it now after I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. Maybe you won't. I don't know how much influence I have. So yeah, guys, thanks for watching. I'm gonna keep drinking this coffee. Oh yeah, and if you haven't subscribed, or if you don't know how to like a video, you just like it below. It's the thumbs up. You just click that thing. If you don't know how to subscribe, it's that red button that says subscribe. Just click that also if you're not already subscribed. And if you feel like this is a channel worth sharing, go ahead and share it with someone that you feel like would like to watch a Korean guy talk to you about movies aggressively. So, as always, guys, I will see you later.